Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Culturally Complex podcast. Today we have a very special friend of mine on, Tensai Hoffman. We've known each other for quite a few years now, and she's been a very good friend to me, and she's somebody in my life who I knew who was adopted. So I figured it would be a good idea to reach out to her to see if she would be willing to tell her story, and she was. So she was adopted from Ethiopia, and she was adopted when she was around 12 or 13 years old. So I think it'll be an interesting experience to hear about, because I know for me and quite a few other adoptees, they were adopted when they were very tiny, like infant. So I think it'll be interesting to hear how the experience differs, kind of being older, being adopted. And for those watching, I believe whenever I recorded this episode, I forgot to plug in my camera. So please excuse the kind of grainy laptop footage that we have in this episode on my end. Just, technical difficulty, human error, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, besides that, sit back and enjoy listening. Okay, well, welcome back, everybody. This is Tensai Hoffman. Tensai, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Tensai.
Okay, so Tensai and I have known each other for 5 years
Yeah,
now. It's been a minute.
yeah. Might
I
be longer
just,
than that.
I think so. Gosh, it feels like forever, honestly.
Yeah.
But she's been one of my great friends. She's was in diversity program with me, and was another person who in my life who I know that was adopted. Uh, and I think kind of surprisingly, we've never really talked about that, not in real depth or anything. So I think it'll be interesting to kind of hear your perspectives and just your experience, because it's definitely going to be different. Because I guess that leads me into my first question that I'm probably going to ask every adoptee that comes on here is,
Sure.
where were you born and where were you raised?
I was born in. I'm so sorry, my laundry thing is going off,
It's
and
okay.
it's really loud. I was born in Ethiopia, and I lived there for about 10, 11 years. Before I was adopted, in 2000, the end of 2006.
Yeah.
And then I spent the rest of my teen and adolescent years in near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Nice.
And yeah, and I went to school in Tennessee, and now I live in Kentucky.
Yeah, you've been all over.
I am.
So, you mentioned that you were in Ethiopia for what, 10 years, 11 years?
hmm
And so I feel like a lot of the times, well, not necessarily a lot of the times, but for me, I was adopted at 8 months old, so I really didn't get any
hmm
memory of where I was from. So I guess the first thing is just tell us a little bit of what life was like in Ethiopia before you were adopted.
Um, well, so my father died when I was pretty young, maybe around 4 years old. And so I don't remember too much of life, you know, before that. I remember I have a couple memories of him. Um, but my memories of Ethiopia are obviously, as you get older, you have more memories and all that stuff. But I think I had a good childhood. I think I did. Um, but when you're a kid, you don't really always notice, my mom was struggling to work and to raise us. I have a little brother that came here with me. And I think, I mean, she ran out of options really because, I mean, usually in Ethiopia, the man is the breadwinner and stuff like that. And she was a stay-at-home wife before that. So yeah, it was really hard on her, and I think she tried to keep us there for as long as she could, but it was definitely a last resort type of thing.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, my memories of Ethiopia was good. I remember playing with my cousins and going to my grandma's house and just the farms and stuff like that. So I think I had a good childhood.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
sounds like it.
Yeah.
I um I feel like adoption, kind of the way you framed it being like a last resort, is
Mhm.
kind of the way that mine was as well.
Mhm.
Just because, um my birth father, I was my mom my mom's first child by my stepfather. So all of the siblings that I had before were like half siblings.
Oh.
And at that point there was like five. And I think she just could not raise one more,
Mhm.
which is very, understandable. I can't imagine raising six kids, especially on my own.
Yeah.
um and like I've had to do a lot of like research to like start this up. And
Mhm.
like I've heard a lot of stories about how adoption almost seemed to be kind of like, okay, well, I'm not going to be able to provide for them, so
Mhm.
let me find somebody that can.
I feel like in a lot of cases that's how it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, how do you remember, like, first kind of, I guess, getting into like the system to get adopted? And like, I guess, did you meet your parents before they like officially adopted you or anything like that?
No. So I don't know how the process really started. I just remember one day going with my mom and my little brother to this interview with people. We sort of knew it would be us like going to America or something like that. So we were excited because, like
Yeah.
in Africa, America is really hyped up. And so we're like, oh, we're going to go to America. But I don't think like I fully grasped that it meant like I might never see my mom again, you
Hmm.
know?
Yeah.
So it was fun, just smiling during the interviews and stuff. When I went back to Ethiopia in 2018, my mom told me that it was actually my idea, this whole adoption thing. And I was like, how would that, like, I didn't know really anything about it, but um, I don't know, something to do with God.
Yeah.
And so I gave her the idea, and then she started with the process. And I think it might have been like a total of maybe 6 months. And then I went to the orphanage in the capital, which is like a 6 to 8 hour drive from my hometown, which is like southern-ish Ethiopia.
Mhm.
Um, and so we were there for another few months. I don't know that I don't really know, but I remember missing my mom so much. Like I would cry every day. And the kids would tease me like, "Oh, you miss your mom." I'm like, yeah, that's my mom. What you mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
um so it was rough there, and then she came up to visit us one more time before we had to leave. And I remember like the realization hitting me that okay, like once I leave this country, like I don't know if I'm ever gonna see her because the adoption agency had this policy where like you couldn't contact, like each of the parents could not contact each other directly, and my parents here in America would have to send updates every 6 months with like photos, like progress photos and stuff, just to make sure I guess we're doing okay and alive. Um, but that's like we didn't hear from her for like 10 years. Um, but she was still getting the updates and stuff like that, which I think gave her some comfort and peace of mind. But yeah, we did not meet. We didn't know who was going to be taking us here or bringing us here. Um, the same day we were adopted was the same day that my adopted parents, came to get us. It was nice. It was exciting. We stayed at hotels. We were like swimming and stuff like that, which I never done before. My
Yeah.
adopted dad almost drowned me. It was an accident. I love water since then.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it was yeah. So that was really the process. And then I don't know if I'm supposed to keep talking, but
Oh yeah,
yeah.
this is all about you. Like kind of getting your
Yeah.
story, I guess, just, you know,
Yeah.
documented. And that
Right.
was like one thing that, you know, I had talked about with a lot of people. Like, you're gonna be like talking about people's entire like histories, like giving an oral
Right.
history. So,
Okay.
let them just talk and, tell their story. Um, but I guess kind of that leads into like another question I have is like, what was it like growing up in like the Pittsburgh area, and like how was it kind of jarring, I guess, going
hmm
from, you know, Africa to America? Like, I guess, what was that experience
Yeah.
like for you?
Yeah. So we weren't in the actual city of Pittsburgh. We lived like 45 minutes outside of it, called Grove City.
Mhm.
My little thing, Grove City Soccer.
Yeah.
Um, so I think maybe it would have been a little bit better if we were in this city because there was more diversity and whatnot. But Western Pennsylvania isn't really known for its diversity.
Yeah.
That's where we were. Um, I had since I was older, I had a really hard time adjusting. Like I don't know, like it was just like a cultural shock. I maybe spoke 2 words of English before I came to the States. Um, Nobody looked like me. I missed my food like for the first like 4 to 6 months of my life in America. All I ate was boiled eggs and chili. I hated everything else.
Scrumptious.
Yeah, I hated pizza. I hated ice cream. I couldn't. Um, and at that point, like I'm pretty young, so I don't really know how to make. I didn't know how to make Ethiopian food. Like I would help my mom and stuff. But that's pretty much the extent of what I know, what I knew. And so like we happened to run into this couple at like a Wendy's because they had the chili. um, Yeah, and they were speaking Amharic, and I was like, "Oh, wait a minute. Okay." So we connected with them, and every once in a while they would come to our house, show us how to make food and stuff like that, and I would just have like people to actually talk with. Because the only one I could really talk with was my little brother. And then I guess I don't really know what happened to them. We just kind of fell off. But I don't know. I still had a hard time because, like I said, I was young enough to not know what I'm doing in the kitchen. And my adoptive mom, she's no offense to her, but she's not really a good cook. So even when the people came and taught us how to cook and make Ethiopian dishes, like it just did not, it was not it. So that didn't work out. I My brother adjusted much better than I did because he was like 6, 7 years old when he came. And he's not so shy. So he's pretty social. I'm a bit more reserved, or was. And so I just had a harder time making friends for a while, and I don't know, everything was just so different. Like I would even yell at my parents, adoptive parents, for listening to the radio because I like Ethiopia is like a majority Christian country, and the particular area I'm from was like very, very religious. My mom was very religious. And so, like, she instilled in me some very important values, I guess. And so I tried to bring them here. And I just feel like, you can't listen to that. You're going to hell.
Yeah.
I know. Um, so it took me, like probably 2 years maybe before I started like settling. Um, yeah, but yeah, I learned English. I adjusted for the most part. So
Yeah.
here I am.
Yeah, I find it interesting that you said that like your brother had an easier time adjusting, but I guess,
hmm
it is because, you were, I guess you remembered more, and
hmm
you were like more, I guess, in tune with, the culture where you were born. And, I mean, I'm sure he was too, but I guess at that such young age, you haven't hit that like adolescent super like formative years yet.
Yeah,
So yeah, I guess that makes sense.
yeah.
um So I guess one thing I kind of want to ask you is like, when, I guess, did you kind of understand what adoption was and like what it meant and how your experience was going to be different from like the people you lived around now, and like, you know, uh once you got to America, I guess, if that question makes sense.
Yeah. I think I probably knew as soon as I stepped foot in the States, everything was so different. Everything. Like I said, the food, language, what people look like. So yeah, I knew it wasn't gonna be the same for me. And while like I didn't think about like things like race and what necessarily like out of depth, like I started seeing it more in my teenage years, like experiencing like racism and being called slurs and all that, especially growing up in like a hillbilly almost type of town.
Yeah.
Type of town in Western Pennsylvania where like 99% of the people there are white.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've known that my experience was going to be different since then. But took a little bit for the racism to hit. And I'm sure I probably faced like microaggressions and all that before then, but I didn't really speak English for like a while, so maybe
Yeah.
I didn't connect the dots.
I guess, you know, growing up, like once you eventually started to like make friends and everything, like, did they kind of ever understand like what, I mean, I guess where you were older, it probably made more sense to them, but I know like when I was younger, I would tell people I was adopted, and they would be kind of confused. So did like the people you grew up with like around like being your friends, like did they kind of grasp what it was?
Yeah, yeah, I would say so. Like you said, or like I said, I came here when I was older, and when I started making friends, I was like what, like 12, 13. So they got an understanding. They come to my house. My parents are white. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, yeah, they got that.
Yeah. I guess like too, like, did you ever feel somewhat disconnected from your like peers in a way?
Yeah. Um, I think I especially felt it when it came to like boys, I guess, and dating
Hmm.
and all that. Um, it was so I would say it was probably more like in my teens, like starting from like 13 and stuff like that. Because like when I started having crushes, and even when people are young in like middle school, they still like date and whatnot. And so I don't know, like some people made it very obvious that they preferred only to date like white girls.
Yeah.
So I think I was feeling a disconnect there, and pretty much, yeah, pretty much all my close friends were white. Um, and so like a lot of times, like I wouldn't give it a thought, but there's just times where like if somebody else says something, about my race or theirs, or if they bring something up, it usually wouldn't be me, but like at points like somebody else would bring it up, and then I'd be like, oh, like right, yeah, that's right. I don't look like you guys.
Yeah.
And then even like when people would realize like I'm from Africa or something, they would say something like slick or something racist or some sort of microaggression. And so I feel like there's always been kind of a disconnect there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I understand what you mean. Like, I but at the same time, like, it didn't necessarily register to me because
Hmm.
I had grown up in it, and so I really didn't know anything different. And you know, I guess I'm kind of interested to hear from you. Like, when did you like start to realize, like, when you were, I guess, exposed to different races other than white people? uh, when did that start to click? Like, oh, like what I experience might be so different from, you know, I guess like I didn't really fully experience any racist stuff, or at least didn't register until I had
Hmm.
moved out of Kentucky and moved to Virginia. once I went to Milligan and started meeting people too that were
Mhm.
from all different backgrounds, it was kind of like, oh, well, these people experience that too. Once you started like meeting people that weren't white, how did that kind of, you know, shift your thinking, I guess?
Yeah. So, like I said, growing up in that town, like mostly all my friends were white. I didn't really make any non-white friends like that, like close non-white friends, until I got to Milligan as well. Um, and like some of the people, like Elise, like was adopted. We share our experiences and stuff like that. And then like whenever we be talking about like our experiences growing up and all of that, I look back and be like, wait a minute, like okay, that's not normal, like if I went to the store, me and my brother would be followed, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was like you don't really put two and two together um until you start talking to other people, and it was like, oh, okay, like that's what is it called, targeting discrimination. I don't know
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
um
I'm trying to
so
think of the word too.
yeah, it definitely helps you like think about like the way you grew up when other people talk to you too.
Yeah.
um so yeah, like my friends, like I have friends of all races now, which I think when I was younger, it's like I get maybe it didn't matter to me that much, but now that I do have like black, Asian, white, Latino friends, like it makes a huge difference having that kind of exposure. And I wish I had that when I was younger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also agree because I
Hmm.
think I was one of like 4 or 5 like non-white people in my class in high school, and
Yeah. Yeah.
most of them weren't even like Hispanic or anything.
Hmm.
So it's like I never really got that exposure to anything besides like going to eat at like a Mexican restaurant, and that was it. And um, then too, like there was like a weird like they come up to you and they want to know like, do you speak Spanish? And it's just like, no, like I
No.
was fully raised on English. um so I guess like also, did you ever start to feel like, I guess, a disconnect from like your culture in Africa? And did that, you know like how did you feel if that did happen, or where you were kind of older, like did you always kind of have a piece of that with you?
Think I always had a piece of it with me, but I mean, there's still definitely a disconnect there as well. Um, I especially felt it um, while at Milligan too. A lot of the Mount Mission kids were Ethiopian. Yeah, I don't know if you remember all of them, but they just be asking me questions and sometimes even making things up. I'm like, first of all, you didn't hear that from my mouth, so I don't know. They made me feel kind of like other, if that makes sense. So I never really made an effort to be like friends with them like that either. I already had my own group of friends, my own set of friends that I was happy with, but I never went out of my way to make friends with the other Ethiopians or Eritreans. Just because I don't know. Maybe it's just that group, but they were very judgmental.
Yeah.
So.
Yes. I can definitely see that. Like whenever I talk to, certain people, uh
Mhm.
it's, you know I also feel a kind of sense of being like outcasted, and it's because I was raised in white culture.
Mhm.
So, and I guess it made me feel personally like I was just like not welcome in that circle at all.
Yeah.
um and like, you know even people like I considered like friends would be like, say stuff to me, and it took me a while to realize. I was like, okay, like just because I'm adopted doesn't make that right for you to say that to me.
Right.
Like
Mhm.
it doesn't feel good to
Mhm.
have that be said about you. um but at the same time, like, you know it almost makes you question, like, okay, well, I was born in this culture, but I don't understand anything about it, so maybe I'm not, you know,
Yeah.
worthy of knowing anything about it. Um,
Oh, Sam.
but you know, I think that's something I've had to like work with myself, was just
Mhm.
like, you know, learning to deal with that, I guess, disconnect.
Yeah,
um
it's hard.
yeah,
Um, and you just yeah, it makes you view yourself like a certain way, but just gotta work through it. You know, doesn't
yeah,
make you any less worthy of being a part of that culture. You know.
yeah. And I guess that's something I kind of want to ask you, like, about parents in particular. Like, you know, they provide us love, shelter, and you know, everything else, until we're able to make it on our own. um but at the same time, like, I guess when you have a kid that's like your own, it, they're probably going to experience life the same that you experienced it. But when you're adopting a kid, specific like international adoption, like,
Mhm.
that's going to be very different. And so
Yeah.
I guess, did your parents ever like, I mean, I'm sure they did, where you were like older, um like, kind of prepare you more for like what it's going to be like, or did they not?
They did not. They did not. I've this is a conversation I've had with them like in more recent years. I
Mhm.
tell them and just be like, this is what kind of experience I had growing up and blah blah blah. And you know, for like the first few conversations we had, they just deny it. And then I don't know, like especially my dad, like I think being like a white cis man in America, like I just don't think he has any grasp or idea of what it's like to not be that,
Yeah.
basically. And so, and he's still like, you know, he's more willing to listen now, which I'm glad, but he still doesn't fully accept, okay, like he could have done better as a parent.
Yeah.
Um, my adoptive mom has come around. She used to gaslight me all the time. She'd be like, "That's not true." Yes, it is. Yes, this is very true. Um, yeah, I mean, it's like difficult conversation to have because I don't know how to bring it up without making them feel like I'm throwing them under the bus. But at the same time, they definitely could have done better.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody should really be adopting from like other cultures or internationally unless you like do everything you can to make sure that you're prepared. You
Yes.
know, if that means taking cooking classes to make sure that you know that your child has that like remembrance, that memory, or that heritage. Trying to get them involved in as many things involving their heritage as possible. Um, and if they speak that language, or even if they don't know the language from like their own their original culture, just trying to make sure that like you have the resources to provide that. I don't know. Anyway, and I mean, my adoption was what, like 17 years ago. So, I mean, I understand they didn't have as many resources as possible, but at the same time, like think about where you live, you know? Am I like, what would it be like for your child growing up if you grew up in like a predominantly white area where there's like absolutely no diversity? Like, what would that be for them? And there's just a lot of things to consider, you
Yeah.
know, other than just being like, oh, I just want to give my kids a loving home and blah blah blah. And, like, it's so much, it's deeper than that, at least for me.
Yes. Yes.
um
I agree.
yeah.
And like, I kind of like, you know, it's hard to admit that you might be making a mistake.
Hmm.
So I can see why parents can get like defensive. Like, I know I like, my mom was kind of the same way for a bit. Like, if I would bring up like, oh well, like, you know, this is kind of what, you know, I felt and what I experienced, she'd be like, well, you know, I didn't ever see that. And it's just like, okay, well, just because you didn't see it doesn't mean that's not how I felt.
Uh,
Like, you know.
typical. Mm.
And you know, she also is kind of, you know, we've had conversations like that too. And like even just yesterday, like I was talking to her about like doing this with you, and
Mhm.
she was, she kind of said, I was not prepared for what it would be like. And
Mhm.
so she said that that's something like now that she hopes is happening with adoptions, that they're, telling parents like, here's what's, going to happen. And, you got to be ready for your child to experience life differently than you have. Like
Mhm.
it's not going to be exactly the same, even though you might try to make it feel like it is, and it just won't be.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, I guess that kind of covered my next question too, which was like, could parents do anything to help their child, like, you know, uh, you know, to understand that adoption is going to shape their whole life, and like you said, it's more than just providing a loving home.
Mhm.
Uh, I mean, it is that to a certain extent, but at the same time, you have to be ready to talk about like, okay, well, your skin color is different than mine,
Right.
so you know I've never experienced racism, but you might, because you are a different skin tone than me.
Right.
So, is there anything else maybe that you think could help parents prepare their kids more, or is that did you kind of cover it?
I feel like I kind of covered it. I was going to mention that like my brother has had multiple like involvements with the police.
Mhm.
Sometimes they just be showing up, and the first couple of times like my dad would dismiss it, and then after a while he realized it was a pattern, you know. He has four biological children of his own. Um, one of which does literally the same things that my little brother would do. And my little brother would get in trouble for it, but the other one wouldn't. And so I think maybe that was like his first time being like, "Oh, okay, they're targeting my black son." You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, no, in general, like it's important to have those talks. Like, okay, you might be targeted for this too. Um, I don't know. There's a lot. There's a lot that needs to go into it. You know.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but I think
Yeah,
I covered everything.
yeah. And I hope to maybe unpack a little more of that, like with other people that I have come on. Like I'm planning on asking, uh, like some parents to come on and like kind of see
Oh,
what they, think, and you
okay.
know, um, because I know a lot of the articles of people that I've like read, their parents talking about how their kids are experiencing stuff like that, like
Hmm.
being followed in stores and having police called on them just for being in their neighborhood, even
Yeah.
though they live there. And so, I think they started to see it and say, okay, this is a problem. We need to change this. Um, and so, I guess, um,
Are you going
yeah,
to interview your mom
I
for
don't
this?
know.
No, you don't know. Might be
Maybe.
too touchy. I don't know.
No, I don't think it's too touchy. We've gotten
You
very
know?
like acquainted with it,
Oh,
like
okay, that's good.
talking about it, and also just unpacking like a lot of stuff with our
Hmm.
lives. And so
Yeah.
it kind of almost seems like the adoption and talking about how maybe, she has done some things wrong almost seems like, okay, well that's just like a normal conversation. But like we've talked about like much, more heated things, and so it's kind of just like, okay, well, this doesn't really seem like too
Yeah.
daunting to talk about with her anymore. But for a while it did, because like I
Hmm.
said, like she would get very like, oh well, I never saw that, but it's just like,
Yeah.
yeah. But she's definitely opened up, and she's talked about kind of how she feels like she's made mistakes with us, like, you know not knowing kind of, you know I guess how to incorporate our culture into our lives in any way.
Hmm.
And kind of growing up, how like I've told her I felt like very disconnected and kind of ostracized from the like Hispanic community, and um even in a way like ostracized from the community that I've grown up in, because I'm not
Right.
their skin color, even though
Hmm.
I've you know experienced
You don't
most of
really
the stuff
fit
that
in
they
anywhere.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah. um, which is kind of another thing that I've seen with a lot of like adoptees kind of feeling like, okay, well, you're you have your foot in like two different places, and so it's like, you know, people think you should be representing the culture you were born into, but that's not necessarily the culture you really understand.
Yeah.
And so you feel like, you know, oh well, I even though I was born looking like this and, you know, born into this, I also was raised in like a very different culture. Like Guatemalan culture and Eastern Kentucky culture, 100% different. and
Imagine.
and you know, like
Hmm.
recently I've kind of gotten into the like mentality of appreciating both. Like, because for a while, I guess whenever, you know, like we talked about, like whenever, you know, people from the like Hispanic and Latino community would talk to me and say like, oh, well, you don't really belong here. Well, it's like, okay, well, I tried to learn as much as I could and
Hmm.
everything, and you know, I gained a big appreciation for that culture. But like even recently, I've also gained a appreciation for like Eastern Appalachian, Kentucky Appalachian culture as well, because like uh, it it kind of started with when I saw the new Hunger Games movie, The Ballad of
Hmm.
Songbirds and Snakes, and like
I haven't
a
seen it
lot of
yet.
it's really good, and they incorporate a lot of like the kind of Appalachian culture into it, and like the music
Mm.
particularly, and like I forget how much like I actually like that like sound, and so, you know, even, you know, kind of like hearing that, it's like, okay, well, I have the capability to appreciate both cultures. Like one that I should know and one that I've
Hmm.
grown up in. And I think a lot of that came from just like maturing and realizing that I don't have to like, you know, choose one or the other,
Right.
you know.
That's good. I'm glad.
Yeah.
Yeah. And can I add one more thing?
Oh yeah.
I think people should also, like, before adopting, look at why they're adopting,
Hmm.
because my mom denies it, but like, when she explains it to me, it sounds like she had a white savior complex, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Um, and if that's your intention, you don't need to be adopting,
Yeah.
you know? Anyway,
Yes.
controversial.
No, that's like a very, I feel like, common opinion that I've
Hmm.
seen from like adoptees being like, you know, you might be adopting for the wrong reasons.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right.
So,
Yeah.
um, like I've seen one girl talk about how she thinks like, you know, international adoptions should be like the very last resort if
Hmm.
you like but there needs to be other like systems in place to like help parents to like in the like birth parents
Hmm.
to like, you know, keep their child, because what they're going to experience when they are adopted is like, you know, there's no preparation for that either. So
Yeah.
it's such a difficult conversation to have.
And hmm.
um
Absolutely.
but I guess kind of closing out here is, what advice would you give to adoptees who still might be trying to like figure out where they fit in?
I mean, just going back to what you said, like, you don't have to choose one or the other, you know. Um, and maybe it helps when you also befriend and know other adoptees, because nobody on either side is going to know exactly what you're going through, you
Yes.
know. So the one thing I can appreciate about Milligan is, that it brought me to other people who have had a similar experience, to what I had. Um, so yeah, I mean, like, embrace both of them, embrace both cultures.
Yes. I definitely like agree with you on that. Like nobody's gonna experience what you like. Nobody's gonna know what you go through except for people who've also gone through the same thing.
Right.
So, um, it is very important to like get, you know, acquainted with other adoptees. Like I know, like in doing research for this, I found a nonprofit that specifically like does stuff with Guatemalan adoptees. So I've been
Oh, okay.
trying to like be more like, I
Mhm.
guess, get in that community and kind of, because they've experienced probably the same stuff that I've experienced.
Mhm.
So it is a
Oh,
very
that's
important
cool.
thing.
Yeah. Well, that's nice. I'm glad you
Yes.
found that.
Yes. There's lots of different, like, you kind of have to go searching for them, but there's tons of different spaces for all different kinds of people. And that's like a great thing about the internet is like, you can go and find people who have experienced, the same things that you have. And it's good to kind of even just know that there's other people out there that are similar to you. So it's definitely important for sure.
Amen. Amen to that.
Yes. Well, I think that pretty much concludes everything that I'm wanting to, talk about. So I really appreciate this. Thank you so
Yeah, it's
much.
no problem. It's
Uh,
no problem.
yes.
It's good to see
And
your face again.
I know it's been a long time.
Yeah.